Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Friday, March 17th, 2023. I guess it's St. Patrick's Day for a lot of people and just another day for the rest of the world. However you celebrate or not, just hope your day is going to be a productive and a good day. I can say that I just left another meeting that I hosted. It was a meeting of the Minneapolis North Side Urban Coalition, and the topic was on the impact of substance abuse, particularly opioids and addictions. And I'm a little unsettled by the gravity of the conversation. So if I sound a little bit not riled, but whatever, I'll attribute it to the discomfort that discussion placed in my heart and in my mind right now. So that's a disclaimer. We're going to have a great program. And what's wonderful about Friday is that we call it the Healing Circle, just what I need. And I'm pleased to be in community here with my leader and friend and healer in chief of our community, Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya. And we should be being joined by our colleague, Dr. Oliver Williams, as well momentarily. But today we want to talk about something that's equally, challenging and concerning to all of us. And that is how our children are handled or how they experience being detained. And one of the articles that we lead this discussion with is an article about Florida, talking about how mental health struggles can get a child detained. Before we go into that, however, I want to open with the protocol, the Healing Circle. Dr. Bravada, good to see you, my friend.
Yes.
And let's talk about how we do this healing business on Friday as an in community.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you, Baba Al. Every Friday when we have this precious and what I call sacred space to be able to acknowledge our culture, our land, we spend time before we even do anything to acknowledge our past and our present, as well as the hope it brings for our future. So today on Friday, we start this healing circle, and it is if we're in an African-centered environment. We see ourselves, although not in a physical room together, we envision ourselves as being in a circle of our community. And in that circle, and the reason we use circle is because circles have no space where there's an ending or a beginning. And in that circle, everyone has equal voice, equal access to the center of the circle, which is the place of power. In the circle, we honor our elders because they are closest to the Creator and closest to our ancestors. And we honor our ancestors because they are closest to the Creator. And in that circle, as we show honor to our elders and our ancestors, we also organize ourselves to perform and behave in an orderly manner. So in the circle process, we use a virtual talking stick. So although we're not in the same room together at the same time, we are in a spiritual room, a spiritual circle, and we pass the virtual talking sticks. Someone can ask for it or they can just pass it as we see fit. But that is the honor of being in this space. And as we sit here in this circle of healing, we have to acknowledge the fact that we are learning, growing, and sharing on land that is honed, loved, nurtured by centuries of indigenous tribes, and especially this area where we had the Lakota people. But all of the land that was nurtured and all of the people that we continue to honor, of all these things, the most important aspect of our continuation as a group is understanding the value and the word consubstantiation. And that word consubstantiation means that we are connected to every living thing and to each other, the earth and the sky, everything on it, that we're all a part of that process. So with that, as we begin the dialogue about our community and the aches that we see, and especially around opioid addiction and all types of drug abuse, and the lack of responsiveness, which I'm sure we'll hear in our conversation today, but also about our babies, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So, Chief, the talking stick is back to you.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. B, and thank you for both the settling and the calming of the spirit that the protocol creates, and I personally appreciate that. I also want to tell people that this is an aside, going into before we go into the topic of the day, that on Friday mornings I have my regular personal mental health therapy services from one of the leaders in your company, that not only are we friends and people connected through our business relationships, but I'm also a customer of yours. And I told my therapist this morning that as often as I can, I tell people as publicly as I can that I value the opportunity to engage the wisdom, knowledge, training, and perception of a healer, a therapist. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could destigmatize our community so that all the 75-year-old guys like Al McFarlane and the 65s and the 45s and the 35s and the 25s, in fact, that what if all of the parents put into their child rearing a process for ensuring and developing intentional attention to the mental health of their children, of their babies? What if we created a culture that realized and relied upon this wealth of knowledge and training that we cultivate, so that every step along the way, every person in our community has unlimited access to knowledge, healing, and power, so that he or he can continue on their journey to wholeness and to wellness lifelong. Well, that was how I started my Friday, and I thank you for being a provider, your company for being a provider, and I thank my therapist for the encouragement that my work with her provides me every week when I visit the therapist. Well, let me go to the topic then, and it all ties together. The headline in front of me now says, unnecessary, inappropriate, illegal. The Southern Poverty Law Center lawsuit exposes how nearly 38,000 children each year are seized in Florida, handcuffed, and taken to mental facilities. This is an article that actually appeared in September of 2021, again from the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's called SPLC. And this article, I'll see the author's name momentarily, but I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs to set the conversation for today. The article says that when initials DP, got upset one day, his teacher allowed him to leave the class and take a short walk, giving the 9-year-old boy with autism enough time to calm down and chill out before rejoining his classmates. But on another day, in November of 2018, the boy met with a very different response. This time, 2 adults held him face down on the floor. It followed an incident in which he reportedly threw a stuffed animal in the classroom and made statements that showed he was distraught. A few days earlier, a family member had died. The situation escalated further, and the 3rd grader found himself handcuffed and back in the back of a police car. And instead of taking DP home, police transported him to a mental health facility for an evaluation. He was handcuffed for a total of 90 minutes. This is the final paragraph I'll read. Sadly, many other children in this Florida school district and across the state have been subjected to similar traumatic experiences. In fact, the use of the Florida Mental Health Act, also known as the Baker Act, which allows police officers with limited or no mental health training to subject children and adults to involuntary psychiatric examinations has become so common that people who are detained under the law are said to have been Baker acted. Well, that's shocking. Dr. B, what does it say about our country and our community? And what are the layers of this story? There's a layer simply about child rearing and the rights and the protection of children. There's a layer that talks about how institutions like schools view the people that they are in charge of, and at what point in time does an individual who needs help become a nuisance that's easier to eliminate as a nuisance than to engage as a human being. And then it also goes to the question, the other layer I see in everything is where race comes in, where how white people see Black people, kids, babies, moms, elders. And I don't know what the racial dynamics were in that particular case, but my thought always goes to the likelihood of a system that, and even if the teachers were Black, there's a process they represent. So those are the things that are in my mind. Let me just hand the talking stick back to you to see where you take this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I received this stick because one of the things that I thought about as I reviewed that article is how many kids in my life experience that I have seen as a clinical psychologist working in schools or in other institutions. And what I have found is that there is a disproportionate amount of children of color, especially Black boys, who tend to be the victims of inappropriate management or handling in schools. They are perceived, their little Black bodies are perceived to be of danger. And one of the things is that psychologically in our country, because of slavery and because of the fear of Black bodies, uprising and fighting against the abuse that we've experienced in chattel slavery, there is a special type of fear of Black folks that is not seen in other places. And in fact, when we even think about hate crimes in America, and we find that the largest proportion of hate crimes in America are centered on race. And when we drill down to look at those hate crimes on race, we find that it's about the likelihood of having a hate crime against a Black body is 4 to 5 times more likely than a white person having hate crimes perpetuated against them. So our babies, they go to school in an institutional setting from which people are honed to believe that acting up or violent behavior is a sign of danger in kids, and they misinterpret things children do instead of understanding children. So when I hear that a child throws a stuffed animal, that's not a big deal to me. Who's he going to hurt with the throwing the stuffed animal, the giraffe across the room? Who's he going to hurt? What it is telling us is that the child is hurting. And instead of responding to the pain and looking at it as a wellness issue, I say that a lot of school districts, a lot of institutions put our children on the jail track. I call that the jail track instead of seeing it as an illness or seeing it as an emotional issue and putting it on the well track. And so what we know is that schools are the number one place that refers children for CPS. It's the number one place that will call a police officer for an unincorrigible child. And schools are the basis of holding these institutions. And so when you talked about it, it usually starts from schools. I can tell you right now, that's where they begin. They will put a child throwing chairs around. Instead of calling his grandma or his mama, like they used to do for us, because we didn't have the special ed set up like this when we were little. They didn't have special ed. But if you acted up at school, you know they're not calling the police. They're going to
Right.
call somebody what you perceive as being bigger and badder. They're going to call your mama. So if your mama or your big mama has to come to school, I'm telling you, that's a consequence that you don't want to see happen. But now instead of that, they call police officers. And they even have those in-school officers who are part of the fabric of the school. And their job is to, quote unquote, control the children. So we have a mentality now against Black bodies, no matter how small, that they are, they're dangerous. And we even see people seeing children that way, that they don't, when children get where they're acting out aggressively, we have different holes we are taught to do, and different supposed to be de-escalation techniques that are supposed to be implemented. But if you have 3 or 4 grown people on one child, I don't know how they can call that a de-escalation. That's an escalation in the problem, because now their child is being ganged up on and not even understanding what happens, especially an autistic child or a child with any kind of mental health challenges where they need special handling and they don't need aggression. So that's my feeling about it. I can give you the stick back and see what you think.
Well, Sherilyn LaChapelle was on with me a couple of days ago, and we talked about this thing of how institutions treat our children. But before we started with that conversation, I used a hot topic for that day that talked about the fact that not Johnny Cochran, but what's the brother that is now, we call him the Attorney General for Black America, Crump. Brother Crump, Ben Crump, was doing an announcement I think it was in Tennessee, about a family whose son, 25 years old, was being detained by law enforcement officers, and who had him handcuffed and bound face down and killed him like they killed George Floyd. And so, the thought in the conversation was that we thought that the George Floyd and Breonna and all those murders were so egregious, and that now that we've had a chance to look at them, that the people in authority would be less likely to do those heinous acts against our people. But it's not so. It's still going on. So the question becomes, to your comments about the fear of a Black body and the retribution against us for being Black, right? How do we deal with that? That's one question. But to bring it back to the schools and children, one expects that a school, I think you told us this in the last session, should be a place where children are protected, they're nurtured. But that's not always the case with our children. And you just said that most of the referrals to the police department of our children come from schools. So then let's look at the purpose of schools, and of which schools. I think growing up, you and I grew up in segregated communities where we had Black teachers who, from our point of view, cared about us, loved us, nurtured us. And as you said, if we were acting out, they called your mama, your grandmama, your uncle, and you were in trouble. But there was a sense of bonded community, shared accountability, and the overall objective was to support proper, righteous behavior in you and a future, in community. And then we went through the experience of shifting from schools in our neighborhoods, or the integration that placed us in the company of people who were upset that we existed, or that our existence challenged their sense of who they were. Let me say hi to Michelle Madison, who's joining us almost daily. Thank you, Michelle, for watching the program. Any comments we appreciate. And also I want to shout out to Nicole Williams, who's joining from Georgia. And let me ask you both, if you have a question or comment, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We want to involve you in the conversation. And thank you again for being here. But Dr. B, what do we do? Talk about schools, as you mentioned, when they work for us and when they don't.
Yeah.
From a mental health perspective.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that because my mom, I don't know if I told you or the audience in the past, my mother taught school for 44 years. And she began teaching in a one room building where every corner had a different grade level. So they'd have the little kids on one corner, the high school kids, junior high, elementary, she had them all in these different corners of this one schoolhouse. And as she taught during those years and we began to integrate, I noticed that one of the things that she did that was different than what I see today is she began to show us demonstrably that all children were her children.
Mhm.
Suddenly, we didn't have to just share her with Black kids. We had to share her with Latinx kids. We didn't have any Asian kids in Texas at that time, white kids. But what we did find is that when teachers treat children in their classrooms as if those are their own children, then better decisions are made. And when they see children as the other or less than, poor decisions are made. So when I do consultations, for example, with some of the school districts, I notice that they overpopulate special education classes with Black boys. And I went to visit one that was in one of the richer areas of our state. And they had me to consult because they wanted to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as I went out, I spent the whole day going from classroom to classroom. And I noticed that at one point, a white teacher, had three students sitting on the lab table, and she asked them to get down. Well, none of them moved, but she called the Black young man to sit down. The other two white boys were sitting there and she didn't say anything. So I made note of it. And I pointed out to her that when she chose to do correction, she used him as the example. And those boys still sat on the chair. And then finally one of them got off on his own and sat, and the other one joined him. I went later on that day to the special ed room. And the special ed room was populated by about 4 or 5. It's a self-contained room, which means that they don't go to other classes. It was filled with about 6 or 7 Black children. 5 of them were boys, 1 was a girl, and 1 little white boy who apparently had autism spectrum disorder. And so at the end of the consultation, they asked me, I told them I'd give them feedback at the end of the day. So I met with them and I said, the thing I'm most concerned about is your special ed classroom. And then you could hear them just gasp like, oh, she's fixing to say we're racist. She's going to say we're racist. And I decided to do a new thing. And I said, I am sure I saw only one white boy when this school is populated mostly by white students. And so I'm just concerned about that special ed classroom. And they were getting ready, bracing. And I said, well, where are all the white kids who have special ed needs? Rooms fell silent. How can you have a school this big and you're meeting special ed requirements and you only have one white child in there? So what we have to do is engage courageously in these conversations with our brothers and sisters who are white and running organizations such as schools or daycares or after school centers like the Y. They have to be aware of their own internalized biases and prejudices, and they do need us to reflect back. If we don't step up in those spaces, how are they going to have a mirror of the behavior that they're exhibiting that's inappropriate? So that's what I feel as a psychologist, that one of our roles socially and culturally is to, one, empower Black parents and parents of color to know you have a voice. And I teach parents that if you see something going on at that school that's raggedy, you don't have to come up there in your hair curlers and your house shoes and, your dice cheek, you're going to cut somebody out. You don't have to do that. Simply write a letter. Send it to the school, certified mail. Tell them my child is being mistreated. And this is what I want you to do about it. And I can tell you from consulting in those schools, and don't just drop it off. Like I said, send it certified, so they have to sign for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it will go straight up to that principal. And after that, they will be watching your children like they're Sasha and what's the name? Malia Obama.
Obama, that's right.
They'll watch your children, and they'll make sure that they're safe.
They'll watch out for them because they know you're watching.
That's right. That's right.
Well, as I'll take the talking stick back, as you were speaking, it's uncanny, but not that what you said about observing the classroom in that suburban white school is exactly what Shirlene LaChapelle said. I was asking her story, her path, her growing up in Chicago. And she said that she remembers she was a swimmer at swim class, and maybe an English class after the swim class. So she came into the classroom maybe a few seconds after the bell rang. So she was late. And as she walked in, the teacher, who she declared was racist from the beginning, challenged her, stopped her, and told her that she would not accept her coming into her classroom after the bell rang. And she should leave and go to the principal's office. So Shirlene said, "What about these two white girls behind me? They were in the swim class too. And it just takes that much more time for us to come out of swim and then come back to class. And that's why we're late." She refused to leave. But what that story is the same story of why they stack all of our children into special ed, and then they excuse. And they do it in a way that's demoralizing and confirming the privilege of white people and confirming the second-class status of our people if we let them. What kind of message are they sending to us? You're sending a big message, about our place in their world. And they want us to know that it's theirs and not ours, that they make the decisions. And I think we have to resist and fight that. I was also reading something on Nubia. I talk about narrative in Nubia all the time. And last night I was reading a piece by, and I can't think of the gentleman's name right now, but I will. What's coming into my mind, he talked about exactly what you said. When you have a complaint about anything in the culture, in the society, in the community, get in the habit of writing it down. Document everything. And he said, we are used to getting mad, showing up in hair rollers and using the language and telling them off. But it doesn't do anything. It might make us feel good for a second, but it's not going to change. And change comes from documentation, writing it down and publishing the observation and getting in the habit of doing that. And so the question is, how do we reacclimate ourselves to use the power of the pen and to understand that part of our mission on life is to document what we think, what we see, what we experience. In fact, so that reminds me that I've seen movies, for example, where I'm right now just in my mind's eye thinking about maybe a Chinese movie or something where at this time in the culture, the samurai or people who were learned had to walk around with a book, and they had to document everything they did every day. At any time, a superior officer to come and ask them for their book, and the book should be a complete journal of X amount of time. And why is that important? What would that mean for us if we were in the habit of documenting our daily lives? It's like keeping a calendar, really. A calendar is the same kind of thing. But what if we had an intention of saying to ourselves that what I do today is important? And it's important enough for me to write about it, to reflect on it, and to capture the highlights from where I stand right now of what I have done, what I have experienced, and what expectations I have therefore set for myself for the rest of the day, for tomorrow, and for the future. And what if that was an activity that was cultural, that we raised ourselves as a community and as a people to be documentors of our existence, that we are actually building the story of our presence body by body all over the country, all over the world. I'm just thinking out loud. Dr. B, I'm going to hand the talking stick back to you. What do you think?
That's exciting to me because I think of us as the original historians and the original scholars. And I think of our story being worthy of notation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of how a lot of times in my work with people, I ask them to document their experiences through journaling, and how the journal is like a photo album of your emotional growth. As you write those things down, you look back over time and you see how much you've matured, how much you've grown, what you've learned. And so, who else better than you to write your own story, to write your own experience down? And if we were a people who would decide that what we do, what we experience, is worthy of historical management and care, then that would change a lot of times about what we do in terms of our behavior. Even
Mm-hmm.
in psychology, we keep psychology when we're working with eating disorders, we keep food journals.
Mm-hmm.
And the food journal is said, and it does influence what you choose to eat. Now,
Mm-hmm.
nobody may be around when you choose to get that Snicker from the gas station, but if you got to write it down, you probably think twice about doing it because you got to be true to yourself. You can't cheat yourself. So there's power in accountability,
Mm-hmm.
personal accountability. That's what that indicates to me. And that's what it says to parents and those of us who are in community. If we keep that record, somebody, including us, has to be accountable for those experiences. And I do see that Nicole had a question. I don't know if she got a chance to write it out to you, Brother Al, but I would certainly like her to share. She said, "How can I get involved in this conversation?"
And her, she made the statement, we should leave a blueprint. Our documentation of who we are and where we are is in fact leaving a blueprint. Well, I hope we can invite her to join us on this call. I'll be glad to have her in the conversation if that's a possibility. I don't know that we can do that technically, but we'll see if we can.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. We'll monitor the questions. And so my next question on the same theme, Dr. B, is about you know, the society itself, the culture. And as you were speaking, the thought flashed in my mind about, I think, Justice Taney, who in 1878 or after that maybe said, and that might have been in the Dred Scott decisions. I'm not sure when it was, but I just recall the statement that there's nothing a Black person can say or do or feel that anybody white is obligated to honor. And if that is the sentiment of the Supreme Court justice and reflective of the culture of the society at large, what do we do? If we know that we're in a place where embedded, the programming is to demonstrate that our feelings, our humanity, our lives don't matter, right? And that there's nothing about us that they, white people, are obligated to respect or respond to. That's a weighty, arrogant, inhumane position, but it's a reflection of the culture, the society.
It is.
What do you think?
I think that you're dead on when you talk about that because, I still have this idea, and I'm writing about it, called oppression reactive syndromes. So, an oppression reactive syndrome is the existence of oppression in an environment. And one person may be the victim of oppression, the other may be the victimizer. But in any case, if one becomes an oppressor, there is a psychological series of acrobatics that must take place before you can dehumanize someone else. And the primary criteria for dehumanizing someone else is to dehumanize yourself. So as we talk about how society and white folks and folks in power with their white body supremacy choose to marginalize us, it's often because they have a fear of one, sharing power or relinquishing power. And that idea is if they give or share power, that you will retaliate to them because that's what they would do. So expecting other cultures who are generally more interdependent, collectivist in value systems, communal in value systems, to become suddenly individualists and to become power mongers over and over other people and situations. They're expecting us to do that. And I wish more often that we did use our power as a people in a more productive managed way. But I also see that they fear that if they relinquish it to us, that we're going to do to them what they have always been afraid that we were going to do to them if we had power.
Is that a possibility? Do you think we would, number one? And, I don't think they're going to relinquish power. I think if we experience power, it'll be of our own making and taking. The question is the taking of power that we are obligated to pursue the same as the taking of power that they actually use, that we have the historical records of the oppression that was the result of their taking of power? Can we take power differently? Is there a different scenario, narrative, possibility that is healing, restorative, humane, and moves not only our people towards our freedom and our being our best selves, but necessarily as we become our true selves, it demands and expects of others that they be selves they probably don't recognize right now. And it wouldn't be a retributed self, the victim retribution, but would be an enlightened and opened and elevated self. Am I making sense at all?
You are making a lot of sense. And guess what? That's where we are now. That's why we suddenly hear, not even suddenly, we more loudly hear the cry that our Black lives matter, that affirmation of our right to exist. And we have power, and we use power in different ways as Black people. Even a moment ago, as we were talking about the healing circle, in that circle, we share power. So every voice, whether it's a child or an elder, with permission to speak in order, in an orderly way, has the right to have voice. And I think of it in our culture where you might be, I'll even think of my dad being a construction worker, and at times in his life as a janitor at the school, that he was in these positions, but in those positions, he worked with respect. And the same man who was a janitor or a construction worker Monday through Friday could be head of the deacon board on Sunday. So seeing how we use power in an egalitarian way, that everyone has space for their gifts, their talents, their dreams, their hopes to be realized. That is very African of us. And no matter what we've done, we still hold on, even if it's not as bold and big as it once was. And I believe we're on the mend back. But even in our smallest environments, we hold power in a way that is shared and celebrated. That's what we do. And that is surely a core part of our healing. It's a
Let
good
me
one.
go back to the immediate topic, and that is mental health in children. And I had another article pulled up to share. It's an article by actually an article by Donna St. George, and I believe it comes out of the Washington Post. The article was published on March 16th, and I'll read a couple of paragraphs because it keeps us focused on this question of children being detained. So this one says that when a fourth grader in Florida was frustrated about having to sit out his classroom recess, he penciled a word on an outdoor bench. The word was kill. The teacher asked him about it, and he said it was what he wanted God to do to him. His mother, Mara Marino, guessed he was hurt and angry. She said, he's not a mature 10-year-old. But soon, a sheriff's deputy who was working in the school stepped in using a controversial state law to order an involuntary psychiatric evaluation and confinement for up to 3 days in a mental health facility. Marino, who rushed to the school after getting a call about the incident, was stunned, pleading with the officer and asking to be with her son. The deputy drove away with the terrified boy, and Marino followed closely behind them in their car, watching her son stare out the back window, sobbing, his hand on the glass. How terrible. So the last paragraph, it says that every day in Florida, children and adolescents are involuntarily committed for psychiatric assessments under the Baker Act, a 1971 law. In fiscal year 2021, involuntary exams happened more than 38,000 times to children under 18, an average of more than $100, an average of more than 100 a day, and nearly an 80% increase in the past decade, according to the most recent data. The law is so deeply enmeshed into the state's culture that it's widely used as a verb, as in the 6-year-old was Baker acted. So that's back to that Baker Act again. And when I see and hear stuff like that, I made the mistake of saying $100, but the dollars came to my mind. Managing our children and our family and our lives is a business. And as I often say, too often, Dr. B, I believe that we get the misery, they get the money. In this case, the motive is not, from my point of view, and I'm not close to this, but I would guess the motive is more simply to create a processing and billing more than healing. Billing, not healing.
Oof.
And the beneficiaries of that process are white people who have no intent to acknowledge, affirm, or accept our humanity and our cultural identity, our cultural ways of knowing, because they perceive that to be a threat to their power and their knowledge, but they also see taking that position creates an opportunity for them to generate revenue. They get the money, we get the misery. What do you think?
Oh my goodness. Billing versus healing. You just talked about something that I think is so critical. And I think sadly that Florida isn't the only state that does it, but Florida tends to be a state that dehumanizes everyone who is culturally different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really sad that our children are treated that way. Because even here in Minnesota, I had a young girl, 9 years old, who was being raised by her grandmother with other siblings, but she definitely had an anxiety disorder. The child did. And she would see her mother, who was a drug addicted person, on her way to school every day as she tried to get on the bus. And so kids would make fun of her. There goes your mama, your crack mama, and just had her always angry and upset. And one day she had seen her mother as she was going to the bus, and somebody said something, and you're just like her or something like that. So she got on the bus and she started to argue with the young man. But then by the time they got to the school, she had already thrown some licks. And so next thing you know, she went in. Nobody had done anything yet. And she went into the classroom. I think they had breakfast or something. She went in and just threw some chairs. Next thing I know, she's 9 years old, not more than 70 pounds, 9 years old, in the back of a police car in handcuffs. And if they don't see that that's traumatic for a child, that's some real degree of ignorance and denial. And what that does for our kids being treated as commodities through these systems, whether it be child protection, the system of juvenile justice, these babies become commodities, and their racialized bodies become the stock that is traded in these systems. And I do believe they are more motivated to do it, to lose the humanity of a Black child than one of a white child, because it's also not is minimizing their fear because they're in control of you now, but it's being reinforced socially by finances. So there's just two good reasons to kick a Black kid out of class and to send them to the police system. Two good reasons. You don't have to fear them anymore. And then the second reason is you get some money out of it. And as you know, when we even went to the legislature just past week, when we talked about the fact that it takes about maybe $11,000 a year for a child to get mental health services and his or her parents to get mental health services, yet it costs over 200 and I think it was 40 or 240,000 a year to put one child in jail. And so when we look at that, I mean, do we want to spend 11 or we want to spend 21? Well, if you're the recipient of the 200,000, then you prefer that. But if you want to be safe in your neighborhood, you want a productive person who can pay taxes, help support you, help support everybody's wellness, then that cost, which is so much lower, is marginalized when you're the one profiteering off of the misery of the Black community.
I wrote a piece some years ago, Dr. B, and I actually shared this in testimony at the legislature at that time. And the piece was entitled Black Crime, Black Punishment. And the premise of the piece was that our communities and our people are portrayed, described, assigned the position of the problem of criminal or of suspect or of however you want to call it. And I said, in my piece, if that's the case, if Black crime is the problem, Black punishment ought to be the answer. But what do you mean by punishment? It means that all the police, all the sheriffs, all the social workers, all the judges, all the builders of the correctional institutions, all of the landscapers of the buildings that house people, all of the parole agents and aftercare. And let's look at the economy, which you just said this, of first of all, categorizing and then managing the category. You create the category out of your either insecurity, but you discover the opportunity in creating and maintaining the category and you milk it. So we become a cash cow for white people, white society. And that's interesting. Well, you know what? I'm hoping that I want to thank again, Nicole Williams for watching the program. And I see that Melissa J. Hill is here and she says, teach, thank you so much. And that we should desire to share and for transcendence. And again, Nicole Williams, thank you. Rochelle, Nicole, thank you. We'd love to have you all involved in the conversation. And you could send a note to schedule the conversation and we could send you a link to have you bring you on in the conversation. We appreciate you listening to this conversation. Dr. B, let me hand it back to you. What do you think?
I think that the fact that we are reduced to being a paycheck, not just for one person, but for a whole pipeline of predatory behavior that has no, what is the word? No challenge or motivation to stop doing what they're doing. The only way, in my opinion, for us to go beyond that is for us to take over those institutions, to redefine those institutions, and to create alternative institutions that will butt up against them. So what would it be like if the parents in my Project Marua premeditated boot camp set up a program? You hear me? These are trained parents, 30 hours a week. They watch each other. They watch their kids. They're veterans. Set up a program for parents. If you're having trouble with your kid at school, they got permission to call you first. And they, instead of getting over there watching TVs and as the world's turn, if kids get suspended from school, send them over there and they would get homework. They get the same class they would have gotten in school. And the child will soon learn that if I act a plum fool at school, I can run, but I can't hide. I'm gonna still have to go take school over here with all these extra mamas and daddies. So I might as well act right in school. And if there is a mental health problem, have our parents be able to recognize it and not hold stigma and shame around it. This is what you started the whole conversation with today. If a child is losing a lot of people that they love in their family, don't think they're like adults and they can just handle it because they haven't said anything to you. You ask them. I want our parents to know, don't wait for children to come up, say, Mother, I'm in bad need of a therapist. No, they tell you when they disobey, when they talk back, when they start fighting, when a child who used to never say anything is talking back, or a child who used to talk all the time is being quiet. If you know those things, those are cues to let your child know he or she is hurting. And if they're hurting, I want to see our parents equipped with the skills that it takes to help them and get them to help. So that when you do it, it's preemptive. It's not like they're going to get to school and people are going to act up. They have a guidelines at school. You can even meet with teachers and faculty and principals and tell them, look, I want my child, if he's been going through a lot with COVID, he lost his grandma and all these different people that he cared about, and he's not me and the same child I used to know. I need you to do these 3 or 4 things before he gets in any trouble. And I can tell you, if you make those kind of bargains and you go into the classrooms and they know you don't play, which most of our parents don't play, they know you don't play, they will probably comply most of the time. So I have hope.
I think about when a tragedy happens, like Sandy Hook or one of the schools, that had a mass shooter. The news always shows the entire community, the government expressing not only horror, but its obligation to respond to the trauma these children are experiencing. And they give room, they give the community grace, but they also give attention to the likely impact that they cannot know in advance how it's going to impact everybody, but they make themselves and the society, the culture available to those children and those teachers and those parents who were impacted. So then I think about right here where I am in North Minneapolis and over in South Minneapolis, St. Paul, seems like kids are getting killed all the time. And, the one young man who was killed coming home from North High School, the person was sentenced in that shooting just recently. But what about all the children, his classmates, that were impacted by that? People walking down the street and seeing the memorials that are set up that reveal that something tragic happened at this space.
Mhm.
And it's like nobody seems to think that our trauma is important enough to pay attention to and to rally resources to address the trauma, to support the families, the children. And so that's, again, the duplicity, the double standard. While
Mhm.
as the doctors who spoke this morning said, this is why I mentioned in my opening remarks, the doctor from a Broadway community clinic, who's the director of, our president of the Minnesota, I think it's called, I might not be exactly right, but this is the sense of it, Minnesota Substance Abuse and Addiction group of physicians, right?
Mhm.
And he said, Al, I asked him about race and addiction, race and treatment, race and medicine, and how it shows up, because they just presented this wonderful show, not wonderful, but this amazing presentation that shows the track of multiple escalation of the impact of fentanyl and opiate addictions, and how it is really crippling our community,
Yes, it is.
hitting everybody, but destroying ours. And he said, well, Minnesota, I hate to say, is one of the best states in the country for dealing with opioid addiction for white people. That's the way he said it. But I'm embarrassed to say, and it pains me to say, that for Black people, Minnesota is the 50th state in the union. And that history of the disregard of Black people's lives shows up in every aspect of the society right here in Minnesota. It shows up in maternal,
Morbidity.
morbidity, shows up in wealth, shows up everywhere. So look, we're out of time. But this has been a good conversation, Dr. B. It's been a heavy day for me just in this information. I'm going to ask you to sort of close this out in less than a minute.
I'll be happy to do that. Because what I wanted to say as I listened to what you're describing this morning, hearing about babies dying and parents dying, and even knowing that at North Hyde they have school psychologists there from North Point. The problem is they're not doing a whole family.
Mm-hmm.
Our healing has to be in the family system, the whole family. And if anything, if punishment and hurt and harm is the price we have to pay, we've paid it, Brother Al. We've paid it through centuries of harm, centuries of you being used. It's time for us to be well. We have to claim it by any means necessary, and even if it means fighting ourselves.
Dr. B, thank you. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye.